You are
millionaire
so
husband
stupid.
insulted her as stupid in front of everyone at the Christmas party, not knowing she had prepared the biggest surprise of his life. With her heart breaking but her pride still intact, she smiled, pulled out a torching envelope and slapped it straight across his face before walking out with grace, leaving him shocked by what he would find inside. "Hi, my beautiful family. I am Mr. Peter, always here with you in love. Heavenly Father, I thank you for blessing me with this family across the world. Bless every sister, mother, and daughter who listens with a pure heart. May their days be filled with peace, their nights with rest, and their homes with endless love. Lift their burdens, heal their pains, and let them know they are more precious than gold. Amen. My beautiful family, I will take only your 2 minutes. I am the same as most of you, a very sensitive soul. As a child, I could not even see a drop of blood without crying. When my cousin or friend insulted me, I cried. When my late parents stopped me from doing something, I cried. And when I lost my dog Hope, I cried the whole night. Still, even today, I write every emotional and loving story only to satisfy you. If you still leave in the middle, I cannot say anything, but my heart feels it deeply. And in this journey, my biggest strength has been Binta. She changed me so much with her love, her wisdom, and her patience. Without her, I would not be the man standing before you today. My beloved family, this channel was built with my tears, my effort, and my prayers, but it lives because of your love. Every single like, every comment, every moment you spend here is a treasure to me. To my new members, I know trust is not easy, but this is your home now. Stay with me until the end of the story, and you will feel the truth and beauty I pour into every word. If your heart is true, write, present. If your love is real, write, I am with Mr. Peter. Some people spend their entire lives searching for a love that Peter Osgood and Julie Fletcher had found in each other's arms 9 years ago. A love so pure, so consuming, that it made the rest of the world fade into beautiful insignificance. The golden morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, casting ethereal patterns across Julie's dark skin as she moved gracefully through their marble kitchen. Peter watched her from the doorway, his heart still racing the way it did on their first date, when she had laughed so hard at his terrible joke that wine had come out of her nose. That moment had sealed his fate forever. "You're staring again," Julie said without turning around, her voice carrying that musical quality that had made him fall in love with her intellect long before he'd fallen for her beauty. She was preparing his coffee exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of cream, stirred clockwise 3 times. It was a ritual she had never missed in 9 years of marriage. "Can't help it," Peter replied, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "My wife is the most beautiful woman in the world." Julie leaned back against his chest, fitting perfectly against him as she always had. "Your wife is also the luckiest woman in the world." Their love story had been written in the stars, or so it seemed to everyone who knew them. Peter, the ambitious entrepreneur with dreams bigger than the Manhattan skyline, had met Julie, the brilliant literature professor who could find poetry in a grocery list. Their friends had called them opposites, but they were more like 2 halves of the same soul. He provided the drive, she provided the heart, and together they had built an empire of love and success. 9 years. 9 incredible years of waking up in each other's arms, of stolen kisses in elevators, of dancing in their living room at midnight when the city slept below them. 9 years of Peter building his real estate empire from a single apartment building to a $40 million corporation, with Julie cheering him on every step of the way. 9 years of Julie publishing 3 acclaimed books of poetry, with Peter as her first reader and biggest fan. "The Henderson deal closed yesterday," Peter mentioned, pouring himself orange juice. "That puts us over the 40 million mark." Julie turned in his arms, her eyes sparkling with pride. "My millionaire husband just became even more millionaire-ish." Our success, Peter corrected, pressing his lips to her forehead. None of this would mean anything without you. It was true. Every business decision, every risk, every triumph had been shared with Julie. She had been there during the lean years when they'd eaten ramen noodles 5 nights a week, and she was here now when they could afford to buy entire city blocks. Money had never changed them. They still held hands during movies, still left love notes in each other's lunchboxes, still talked until dawn about their dreams and fears. Speaking of success, Julie said, a mysterious smile playing at the corners of her mouth, I have something to tell you after the Christmas party. Peter raised an eyebrow. Can't tell me now? Christmas is our anniversary, remember? 10 years of marriage deserves a special moment. Julie's hand unconsciously moved to her stomach, a gesture so subtle Peter almost missed it. Almost. Christmas. Their 10th anniversary. The thought filled Peter with warmth and anticipation. They had been married on Christmas Eve because Julie had said she wanted their love to be celebrated alongside the season of miracles. Every year since, Christmas had been their personal holiday, their reminder of the day they had promised to love each other forever. 10 years, Peter mused, pulling Julie closer, feels like yesterday and forever at the same time. I know exactly what you mean. Julie's voice held a dreamy quality, as if she were seeing their future stretching out ahead of them, golden and infinite. The intercom buzzed, interrupting their moment. Peter frowned. It was barely 8 in the morning, too early for business calls or deliveries. Mr. Osgood, came the voice of their doorman. Your mother is here to see you. Peter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Eleanor Osgood's visits had become more frequent lately, always unannounced, always at inconvenient times. Julie noticed the change in his posture immediately. After 9 years together, they could read each other's moods like favorite books. Send her up, Peter said into the intercom, his voice carefully neutral. Julie squeezed his hand. She's your mother, honey. She loves you. I know, Peter replied, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. I just wish she'd call first. Eleanor Osgood arrived in a whirlwind of expensive perfume and designer clothing, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her blue eyes sharp and assessing. She had been beautiful once, Peter knew, but years of disappointment and bitterness had hardened her features into something cold and calculating. Peter, darling. Eleanor swept into their apartment as if she owned it, her gaze barely acknowledging Julie's presence. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Never, Mother, Peter said, kissing her cheek dutifully. You remember Julie, of course. Of course. Eleanor's smile was tight, polite, and completely without warmth. Julie, how lovely to see you. Julie stepped forward with genuine warmth, despite the chill in Eleanor's greeting. Mrs. Osgood, it's wonderful to see you. Can I get you some coffee? That's quite all right, dear. I can't stay long. Eleanor's tone suggested that spending time with Julie was something to be endured rather than enjoyed. Peter, I was hoping we could discuss some family matters, privately. Peter glanced at Julie, who immediately understood. I'll be in my office, Julie said, kissing Peter's cheek. I have some grading to finish anyway. As Julie disappeared down the hallway, Eleanor's demeanor shifted subtly. She studied Peter with the intensity of a general planning a battle campaign. She seems content, Eleanor said carefully. She's happy. We're both happy. Peter's voice carried a warning that Eleanor chose to ignore. Happiness is wonderful, of course. But Peter, you must think about your future, your real future. Eleanor moved to the window, gazing out at the city below as if she owned it. You're a wealthy man now. $40 million, I'm told. 42 million, actually. And what does that have to do with anything? Eleanor turned back to him, her eyes glittering with something Peter couldn't quite identify. It means you have responsibilities. To your family name, to your legacy, to the kind of woman who can help you build something truly great. I already have that woman. Julie has been by my side through everything. Julie is a lovely girl, I'm sure. But Peter, darling, you need to think practically. A man in your position needs a wife who understands society, who can open doors, who comes from the right kind of family. Peter felt a chill run down his spine. What are you saying? I'm saying that Margaret Wellington is back from Europe. You remember Margaret, the Wellington shipping fortune? She's single again, and she's always had such a fondness for you. The name hit Peter like a physical blow. Margaret Wellington, the ice-cold socialite his mother had tried to push on him before he'd met Julie. Beautiful in a distant, untouchable way, but with all the warmth of a marble statue. Mother, I'm married. Happily married. I love Julie more than my own life. Eleanor's smile was sharp as a blade. Love is a luxury, Peter. Security is a necessity. Think about what's best for your future. Think about what kind of children you want to raise, what kind of legacy you want to leave. Children. The word hung in the air between them, and Peter felt something twist in his stomach. He thought of Julie's mysterious smile, her hand moving to her stomach, her promise of a Christmas surprise. I need you to leave, Peter said quietly. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Peter, I need you to leave. Now. For a moment, mother and son stared at each other across the vast living room. Then Eleanor picked up her purse, her movement sharp and angry. Think about what I've said, Peter. Think very carefully. Some opportunities don't come twice. After she left, Peter stood alone in his living room, staring out at the city that had always represented possibility and hope. But now, for the first time in 9 years, he felt a shadow creeping across his perfect life. From her office down the hall, he could hear Julie humming softly to herself, the same melody she always hummed when she was truly happy. The sound should have comforted him, but instead it filled him with a terrible sense of foreboding. Something was coming, something that would test everything they had built together. Peter just didn't know that the woman he loved more than life itself was carrying their first child, and that his mother had already begun planning the destruction of everything he held dear. Chapter 2. Poison in Paradise. The devil doesn't come dressed in red with horns and a pitchfork. She comes wearing Chanel and speaking in the loving voice of a mother who knows exactly which words will slowly poison her son's heart. Eleanor Osgood sat in her penthouse apartment, phone pressed to her ear, watching the morning traffic crawl through Manhattan 20 floors below. Her manicured fingers drummed against the Italian marble of her desk as she listened to her son's voice, searching for cracks in his armor of happiness. The Christmas party is next week, Mother. Julie's been planning it for months. Peter's voice carried that same warmth it always held when he spoke of his wife, and Eleanor's jaw tightened. How lovely, Eleanor replied, her tone perfectly measured. I'm sure it will be memorable. 3 days had passed since her visit to their apartment, 3 days of careful planning and strategic thinking. Eleanor Osgood hadn't built the Osgood family fortune by accepting defeat, and she certainly wouldn't start now. Her son might think he was happy, but happiness was a luxury that men in his position couldn't afford. Peter, darling, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day. A pause. Mother, I thought I made myself clear. Of course. But as your mother, I worry about your future. $42 million is a remarkable achievement, but it's only the beginning. Think about what you could accomplish with the right connections. Eleanor rose from her desk, moving to the window where a framed photograph sat on the sill. Margaret Wellington smiled back at her from the photo, blonde, refined, born into old money and older traditions. The perfect wife for a man who needed to think beyond his heart. I don't need connections. Julie and I have everything we want. Do you? Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. Or do you simply think you do because you've never seen what's truly possible? The seed of doubt. Eleanor had planted it carefully, knowing that even the strongest love could be weakened by persistent questioning. She had learned this lesson decades ago when her own husband had been torn between love and ambition. Love had won then, and look how that had ended, with him dead at 52 from a heart attack brought on by the stress of trying to balance passion with practicality. Peter, I had lunch with Margaret's mother yesterday. Did you know Margaret speaks 4 languages fluently? She graduated summa cum laude from Vassar, spent 2 years working with the UN in Geneva. She understands international business, high society, the kind of world you're moving into. I'm not moving into any world. I'm perfectly happy where I am. But Eleanor heard it, the slight hesitation, the tiny crack in his certainty. She smiled, the expression cold and calculating. Of course you are, darling. I'm simply saying that a man in your position has responsibilities beyond personal happiness. Think about your children, Peter. What kind of mother do you want for them? Someone who can prepare them for the world they'll inherit? Or someone who comes from such different circumstances? The poison was spreading. Eleanor could feel it in the silence that stretched between them, in the way Peter's breathing had changed on the other end of the line. I have to go, Mother. Julie's waiting for me. Give her my regards, Eleanor said sweetly. And Peter. Think about what I've said. Christmas is a time for new beginnings, after all. After ending the call, Eleanor immediately dialed another number. Her private investigator answered on the first ring. Mrs. Osgood, I need everything you can find on Julie Fletcher. Her background, her family, anything that might be useful. And I need it before Christmas. Of course. May I ask what kind of information you're specifically looking for? Eleanor's smile was razor-sharp. The kind that reminds my son who he really is. Meanwhile, across the city, Peter stood in his office overlooking Central Park, his mother's words echoing in his mind like a persistent drumbeat. He loved Julie. God, how he loved her. But lately, he found himself noticing things he'd never noticed before. The way she stumbled slightly over the pronunciation of certain business terms. The way she looked uncomfortable at charity galas, standing slightly apart from the other wives with their perfect smiles and practiced conversations. Had she always been so out of place in his world? The thought hit him like a physical blow, followed immediately by a wave of guilt so intense it made him sick. This was Julie, his Julie, the woman who had supported every dream, who had celebrated every success as if it were her own, who had never asked for anything except his love. His phone buzzed with a text from her. Missing you. Can't wait for tonight. Have something special planned. Peter's heart clenched. Julie was probably at home right now, planning some romantic surprise, humming that little melody she always hummed when she was happy. She had no idea that his mother was slowly poisoning their paradise, drop by poisonous drop. That evening, Peter came home to find candles lit throughout their apartment and the smell of his favorite dinner wafting from the kitchen. Julie appeared in the doorway wearing the blue dress he'd bought her for their anniversary last year, looking so beautiful it took his breath away. Welcome home, husband, she said, the word carrying all the love and warmth it had held for 9 years. Peter kissed her, trying to drown out his mother's voice with the taste of Julie's lips, the feel of her body against his. This was real. This was what mattered. You're tense, Julie observed, her fingers working at the knots in his shoulders. Bad day? Just business stress. The Christmas party has everyone on edge. Julie led him to their dining room, where she'd set the table with their wedding china and the crystal glasses they only used for special occasions. As they ate, she chattered about her day, her students, a new book she was reading, plans for their anniversary celebration. But Peter found his attention drifting. Margaret Wellington speaks 4 languages fluently. The thought came unbidden, followed immediately by shame. What was wrong with him? Julie was brilliant, accomplished, perfect exactly as she was. So what if she didn't speak multiple languages or have connections in Geneva? She spoke the language of his heart fluently, and that was all that mattered, wasn't it? Peter, did you hear what I said? Peter snapped back to attention, realizing Julie had been speaking. Sorry, love. What was that? A small frown creased Julie's brow. I said I'm excited about Christmas. Our 10th anniversary deserves something special. Of course it does. Peter reached across the table to take her hand, noting how small and delicate it felt in his. What kind of special? Julie's smile was mysterious, radiant. You'll have to wait and see, but I promise it will change everything. Later that night, as Peter lay awake, listening to Julie's peaceful breathing beside him, his phone buzzed with another call from his mother. I hope I'm not calling too late, darling. Peter slipped out of bed and into his study, closing the door softly behind him. It's fine. What is it? I've been thinking about our conversation today, and I realized I wasn't being fair. I don't want you to think I don't care about your happiness. Peter felt a wave of relief. Thank you for saying that. But as your mother, I also have to be honest with you. The Wellington family has expressed interest in a merger. A business merger, Peter. Their shipping empire combined with your real estate holdings could create something extraordinary. Something that could secure your family's future for generations. What does that have to do with Margaret? Eleanor's laugh was soft, almost sad. Oh, Peter. In our world, business and marriage have always been intertwined. The most successful families understand this. Love is wonderful, but legacy is everything. Legacy. The word hung in the air like incense, heavy and intoxicating. Peter thought about the empire he'd built, about the children he hoped to have someday, about the world he wanted to leave them. I'm not saying you have to make any decisions now, Eleanor continued. I'm simply asking you to consider all your options. For your sake. For your future children's sake. After she hung up, Peter stood alone in his study, staring at a photograph of him and Julie on their wedding day. They looked so young, so impossibly happy, so certain that love was enough to conquer anything. But was it? The question followed him back to bed, where Julie murmured his name in her sleep and curled closer to his warmth. He held her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair, trying to remember what it felt like before doubt had crept into his heart. In the bathroom, hidden behind her skincare products, lay a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines. The secret that would either save their marriage or destroy it completely. Julie had no idea that in 3 days, Eleanor Osgood would discover her secret, and that the woman who had given birth to the man she loved was already planning the death of everything they had built together. Chapter 3. The cracks begin to show love doesn't die with a single gunshot to the heart. It bleeds out slowly, one small wound at a time, while the person holding the knife whispers sweet lies about how much they care about your happiness. Julie Fletcher Osgood woke up alone for the 3rd morning in a row, her hand reaching across cold sheets to the empty space where her husband should have been. The digital clock glowed 6:47 a.m., and she could hear the shower running in their ensuite bathroom. Peter was up early again, leaving for the office before she could even say good morning. A wave of nausea hit her suddenly, sharp and overwhelming. Julie pressed her hand to her mouth, breathing deeply through her nose the way she'd read about online. Morning sickness, the beautiful, terrible reminder of the miracle growing inside her. At 8 weeks pregnant, her body was beginning to change in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. She managed to stumble to the kitchen before the nausea could overcome her completely, gripping the marble countertop as she fought against the urge to vomit. The smell of coffee, Peter's coffee, still warm in the pot, made her stomach lurch violently. "You okay, baby?" Peter's voice came from behind her, concerned but distant. Julie turned, forcing a smile despite her pale complexion. Peter stood in the doorway, fully dressed in his charcoal gray suit, tie perfectly knotted, briefcase in hand. He looked like a stranger wearing her husband's face. "Just tired," she lied, not wanting to reveal her secret before Christmas. "You're leaving early again." "Big meeting with the Henderson group. Could run late tonight too." Peter's eyes didn't quite meet hers as he spoke, and Julie felt something cold settle in her chest. "Peter." She moved toward him, reaching for his hand. "Is everything okay between us?" For a moment, just a moment, his facade cracked. She saw the man she'd fallen in love with, vulnerable, conflicted, desperate to reach for her. But then his phone buzzed with a text, and the walls went back up. "Everything's fine, Julie. I'm just under a lot of pressure with the Christmas party coming up." He kissed her forehead, the gesture feeling more like an obligation than affection. "I really do have to go." After he left, Julie stood alone in their kitchen, staring at the untouched breakfast she'd prepared. The eggs had gone cold, the orange juice warm, and the toast sat like cardboard on the plate. This wasn't her husband. Her Peter would have noticed her pale complexion, would have asked why she wasn't eating, would have held her until she felt better. Something was poisoning her marriage, and she had no idea how to stop it. Meanwhile, Peter sat in his office, staring at a contract he'd read 5 times without comprehending a single word. His mother's voice echoed in his mind like a song he couldn't shake. "Think about your legacy. Think about your children. Think about what kind of mother you want for them." The phone rang, and his secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Osgood, your mother is on line 1. Peter closed his eyes, knowing he should refuse the call, but finding himself reaching for the phone anyway. "Good morning, Mother." "Peter, darling, I hope I'm not interrupting anything crucial." "What is it?" His tone was sharper than he'd intended. Eleanor's laugh was silk over steel. "I wanted to tell you about the most wonderful encounter I had yesterday. I ran into the Wellingtons at the Metropolitan Club." Peter's stomach tightened. "Mother, Margaret asked about you specifically. She remembered that charity gala from 2 years ago where you danced with her. She said you were quite the gentleman." Eleanor paused, letting the words sink in. "She's organizing a fundraiser for children's literacy next month. She specifically requested your involvement." "I'm married." "Of course you are, darling. But surely you can appreciate good breeding when you see it." Margaret graduated valedictorian from Vassar, spent a year at Oxford, and her family has been in international shipping for 4 generations. She understands the responsibilities that come with wealth. The poison was working. Peter found himself thinking about Julie's discomfort at their last charity event, how she'd stood awkwardly in the corner while the other wives discussed private schools and summer houses in the Hamptons, how she'd asked him later why everyone seemed to speak in code about things she didn't understand. "I have to go," Peter said abruptly. "Of course." "But Peter, I'm hosting a small dinner party Friday night. Just a few close friends of the family. It would mean so much to me if you came. Julie and I already have plans. Bring her if you must. Though I should mention, the Wellingtons will be attending." The call ended with Peter staring at his phone, feeling like a man drowning in slow motion. Every conversation with his mother pushed him further from shore, further from the woman who had been his anchor for 9 years. That evening, Julie had prepared what she hoped would be a romantic reconciliation. She'd dismissed their housekeeper early, cooked Peter's favorite meal herself, and lit candles throughout their apartment. She'd even managed to keep down a few crackers, her first successful meal of the day. When Peter finally came home at nearly 10 o'clock, Julie was waiting in a silk dress that had always driven him wild. But instead of the appreciation she'd hoped for, she saw only exhaustion in his eyes. "You didn't have to wait up," Peter said, loosening his tie. "I wanted to. We need to talk." Peter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "About what?" "About us. About whatever's been bothering you these past few weeks." Julie moved closer, placing her hands on his chest. "Peter, you're scaring me. It feels like you're slipping away." For a heartbreaking moment, Peter's defenses crumbled. He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the scent that had always meant home to him. "I love you," he whispered, and Julie heard the desperation in his voice. "God, Julie, I love you so much it terrifies me." "Then what's wrong? Talk to me." But instead of answering, Peter pulled away. "I'm just tired. The business is expanding faster than I anticipated. There are decisions to make, responsibilities I never expected. We'll figure it out together." "We always do." Peter looked at her then, really looked at her, and Julie saw something that made her blood run cold. Doubt. For the first time in 9 years of marriage, her husband was looking at her with doubt in his eyes. "Some things can't be figured out together, Julie. Some decisions a man has to make alone." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What does that mean?" "Nothing. I'm sorry, I'm just exhausted. Let's go to bed." But as they lay in their king-sized bed, Julie could feel the ocean of distance between them. Peter's back was turned to her, his breathing deliberately even, pretending to be asleep. She stared at the ceiling, one hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach where their child was growing. Christmas was 5 days away. 5 days until she could tell him about their baby, until she could give him the gift that would surely bring them back together. A child would remind Peter of what really mattered, would show him that their love was stronger than whatever was pulling them apart. She had to believe that. She had to. The next morning, while Peter was at yet another early meeting, Eleanor Osgood let herself into their apartment, using the spare key Peter had given her months ago. She moved through their home like a predator, searching for something, anything, that could be used to drive a wedge between her son and his unsuitable wife. In the master bathroom, behind Julie's expensive skincare products, Eleanor's manicured fingers found exactly what she'd been hoping for. A pregnancy test with 2 unmistakable pink lines. Eleanor stared at the plastic stick, her lips curving into a smile that would have frozen hell itself. "Perfect," she whispered to the empty apartment. Now she had all the ammunition she needed to destroy them completely. Chapter 4. The Christmas Catastrophe. There are moments that split your life into before and after. Moments so devastating they rewrite your entire story, turning love into loss, hope into heartbreak, and forever into never again. Christmas Eve morning dawned crisp and bright, with snow falling softly outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse. Julie Fletcher Osgood stood in their walk-in closet, her reflection staring back from the full-length mirror as she held a stunning midnight blue gown against her body. Tonight was their 10th anniversary, the night she would finally tell Peter about their baby, the night their perfect love story would become even more perfect. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, perfecting every detail. After dinner, when their guests were mingling with champagne, she would take Peter's hand and lead him to their private study. There, surrounded by the books that had brought them together, she would place his hand on her barely there bump and whisper the words that would change everything. "We're having a baby." The dress was exquisite, flowing silk that would hide her barely there bump while accentuating her glowing skin. She'd chosen it specifically for this moment, knowing that years from now she would remember this as the night their family truly began. "You look radiant," Peter's voice came from behind her, but when she turned, She saw him adjusting his black tie with mechanical precision, his eyes distant and cold. Julie felt the first flutter of unease, but pushed it away. Tonight was too important to let Peter's recent mood affect her joy. Once he knew about the baby, everything would return to normal. Better than normal, they would be a family. "It's going to be a beautiful night," Julie said, moving toward him with hope in her heart. "Our 10th anniversary, surrounded by everyone we love. I can't wait to give you your present." Peter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Present? The best one I've ever given you." Julie's smile was luminous with joy and anticipation, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her stomach. "But you'll have to wait until tonight. I have something very special planned." For just a moment, Peter's facade cracked, and she saw the man she'd married, vulnerable, loving, desperate to hold on to her. But then his phone rang, shattering the moment. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen like a harbinger of doom. "I should take this," Peter said, stepping away from her. Julie watched him leave the room, her heart sinking with familiar dread. Even on their anniversary, his mother's voice took precedence over her own. She pressed her hand more firmly to her stomach, drawing strength from the tiny life growing there. After tonight, Eleanor's influence would be irrelevant. How could anyone compete with a grandchild? In the hallway, Peter pressed the phone to his ear as Eleanor's voice filled his head with poison disguised as concern. "Tonight is very important, Peter. All the right people will be there, watching how you conduct yourself, evaluating your choices. Margaret flew in this morning specifically for your party. It's my anniversary party, Mother. Not a business negotiation." Eleanor's laugh was soft and deadly. "Oh, darling, everything is a business negotiation when you're worth $42 million. Margaret will be stunning tonight. She's wearing that white Valentino gown. The photographers will certainly notice the contrast." The word contrast hung in the air like a threat. Peter felt the familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach. "You invited Margaret to my anniversary party." "I invited the Wellingtons." "Margaret happens to be their daughter." "Really, Peter, you're being dramatic. It's just dinner. Though I should mention, several board members have expressed interest in the shipping merger. Tonight could be very profitable." Peter closed his eyes, feeling trapped. When had love become so complicated? "I found something interesting in your apartment the other day," Eleanor continued, her tone casual but loaded with threat. Peter's blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, nothing important. Just evidence that your wife has been keeping secrets from you. Big secrets. Life-changing secrets, the kind that trap men into situations they never wanted." The word trap echoed in Peter's mind like a curse. The line went dead, leaving him staring at his phone with dread crawling up his throat like bile. What had his mother found? What secrets could Julie possibly be keeping, and why did the word trap make him feel like he was drowning? By 7 o'clock, their penthouse had been transformed into a winter wonderland that rivaled the finest hotels. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables laden with gourmet food imported from France. A string quartet played softly in the corner while couples danced on the marble floor, and nearly 200 guests mingled with champagne glasses filled with Dom Perignon. The cream of Manhattan society had turned out for their anniversary celebration. Business partners worth hundreds of millions, university colleagues from Julie's literature department, old friends who remembered when Peter and Julie were just two kids in love, and family members who had watched their fairy tale unfold over 9 incredible years. White roses and winter lilies decorated every surface, their fragrance mixing with expensive perfumes, and the crisp December air flowing in from the terrace. Ice sculptures depicting swans and hearts created romantic focal points throughout the space. The party was a masterpiece of elegance, a celebration worthy of 10 years of perfect love, and it had cost more than most people's yearly salaries. Julie made her entrance at 7:30, pausing at the top of the marble staircase that led down into their living space. The entire room seemed to pause in appreciation. She was breathtaking in her midnight blue gown, her dark skin glowing with health and happiness, her smile radiant with the secret she carried. Diamond earrings Peter had given her for their 5th anniversary caught the light as she moved, and her hand rested unconsciously on her stomach where their child grew. She looked like a queen, like a woman who had everything in the world to celebrate, like the perfect wife for a man who had built an empire. As she descended the staircase, guests turned to watch her progress with genuine admiration. Women whispered appreciatively about her dress, men smiled with warmth, and for a moment Julie felt like the heroine of her own fairy tale. This was her moment, her night, her chance to share the greatest joy of her life. Eleanor Osgood watched from across the room, her lips pursed in disapproval that she didn't bother to hide. Beside her stood Margaret Wellington, blonde, elegant, wearing a white dress that cost more than most people's cars and seemed designed to make every other woman look overdressed. The contrast was deliberate and devastating, calculated to highlight everything Julie wasn't. Old money, established family, the kind of pedigree that opened doors Julie's accomplishments never could. "She really is quite beautiful," Margaret murmured to Eleanor, her tone suggesting this was somehow a disadvantage rather than a blessing. "Beauty fades," Eleanor replied coldly, her eyes never leaving Julie's glowing face. "Breeding is forever. Notice how she touches her stomach. Such an unfortunate habit, almost as if she's trying to draw attention there." The comment was calculated poison, designed to plant seeds of doubt in anyone within earshot. Several society wives exchanged meaningful glances, their trained eyes now focused on Julie's midsection with speculation. Peter saw Julie from across the room and felt his heart stop. She was magnificent, glowing with something he couldn't quite identify, but that made her more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. For a moment, all of his mother's poison seemed to evaporate, replaced by the overwhelming love he'd always felt for his wife. She was walking toward him with purpose and joy, her eyes bright with anticipation, and Peter realized she was planning to tell him something important, something that would change everything. The thought should have filled him with excitement, but Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. "Evidence that your wife has been keeping secrets from you. Big secrets, life-changing secrets." But then Eleanor appeared at his elbow, her claws sinking deep with practiced precision. "Lovely party, darling. Though I noticed Julie seems rather fuller than usual. I do hope she's not letting herself go. Margaret was just commenting on how well she maintains her figure. Did you know she runs 5 miles every morning? Such discipline." The comment was calculated, designed to make Peter see Julie through critical eyes, and to his shame, it worked. Suddenly, he was noticing things he'd never noticed before, the slight roundness to her face, the way her dress fit differently, the glow he'd attributed to happiness, but now wondered about. "Margaret was just telling me about her work with the Literacy Foundation," Eleanor continued seamlessly. "She's raised over $2 million this year alone. Such an accomplished young woman, such vision for global impact." Her gaze fixed meaningfully on Julie, who was laughing with a group of Peter's college friends, completely unaware that she was being dissected and found wanting. "Of course, not everyone is suited for that kind of responsibility," Eleanor added with surgical precision. "Some people are better suited to simpler lives." The poison was reaching critical mass in Peter's bloodstream, clouding his judgment, turning love into doubt and devotion into resentment. When Julie approached him an hour later, glowing with excitement and love, he saw her through his mother's eyes instead of his own. "Peter, can I steal you away for just a moment?" Julie's voice was warm honey, filled with anticipation for the surprise that would change their lives forever. Her hand was trembling slightly with nerves and excitement, and she kept touching her stomach. I have something wonderful to share with you." But Peter was surrounded by business associates, deep in conversation about a potential merger with the Wellington shipping empire. Margaret stood beside him like she belonged there, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her white dress a stark contrast to Julie's midnight blue. She was contributing insights about international markets that impressed everyone present, speaking with the confidence of someone born into wealth and power. The shipping routes through the Pacific have become incredibly profitable since the new trade agreements, Margaret was saying, her voice cultured and precise. My family's company has seen a 40% increase in revenue just this quarter. Of course, understanding international law requires years of study. The men around them nodded appreciatively, and Peter found himself drawn into the conversation despite himself. This was the kind of woman his mother had been talking about. Sophisticated, knowledgeable, able to contribute to his world instead of just existing in it. "Not now, Julie," Peter said without even looking at her, his voice sharper than he'd intended. "We're discussing business. Important business." Julie's smile faltered slightly, confusion replacing anticipation. "It'll just take a minute. It's important, really important." She emphasized the last words with desperate hope, trying to convey that this was the moment she'd been planning for weeks, the surprise that would make everything perfect again. "More important than a $50 million deal?" The words came out sharper than Peter intended, influenced by the champagne and his mother's constant manipulation. He gestured toward Margaret, who was still discussing shipping contracts with impressive expertise. "Maybe you could learn something if you stayed and listened instead of interrupting." The conversation around them died. Heads turned. Julie felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on her, watching, judging, waiting to see how she'd respond to her husband's public dismissal. Margaret's eyes widened with shock and perhaps satisfaction. Eleanor smiled from across the room like a predator who had finally cornered her prey. "Peter," Julie whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying perfectly in the sudden silence. "Please, this is important. More important than any business deal." But Peter was looking at Margaret, who was discussing shipping routes with the kind of expertise Julie could never match. His mother's words echoed in his mind like a mantra. "Think about your legacy. Think about your children. Think about what kind of mother you want for them." "Can't you see I'm busy?" Peter's voice rose, fueled by champagne and weeks of accumulated poison. The alcohol had loosened his tongue, and Eleanor's manipulations had twisted his heart until he couldn't see straight. "God, Julie, sometimes I wonder if you understand anything about the world we live in. Maybe if you spent less time with your poetry books and more time learning about real business, international markets, the things that actually matter in our social circle, you'd know when to interrupt and when to—" He stopped himself, but it was too late. The room had gone deadly silent, 200 guests watching in horror as one of Manhattan's most beloved couples imploded in real time. Margaret Wellington's eyes widened with shock and perhaps a touch of satisfaction. Eleanor smiled from across the room, like a predator who had finally cornered her prey. Even the string quartet seemed to play more softly. The word hung in the air like a blade about to fall. "When to what, Peter?" Julie's voice was steady, but her hands were trembling, and she could feel their unborn child as if it too were recoiling from its father's cruelty. The entire room had gone silent. Every conversation died. Every laugh ceased. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, frozen by the electric tension. "When to keep your mouth shut and not embarrass yourself by acting so stupid." The word hit Julie like a physical blow. Stupid. Her husband, the man who had promised to love and honor her, the man whose child she was carrying, had just called her stupid in front of everyone who mattered to them. For a moment, the room spun around her. She felt the blood drain from her face, felt her knees threaten to buckle, felt the baby inside her as if it too were recoiling from the cruelty of its father's words. the faces around her blurred with shock and pity and horrified fascination. But Julie Fletcher Osgood was not a woman who broke easily. 9 years of love had given her strength, and the child she carried gave her purpose. With hands that trembled only slightly, she reached into her purse and pulled out the envelope she'd carried all evening, the envelope containing the ultrasound photo and pregnancy confirmation that was supposed to be their greatest Christmas gift. The entire room watched as she walked slowly toward her husband, her dignity intact despite the tears burning in her eyes. When she reached him, she looked directly into his face, the face she'd kissed goodbye that morning, the face she'd loved for 9 years, the face that had just destroyed her heart. "This was going to be our greatest Christmas gift," she said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. And then, with all the strength she had left, Julie threw the envelope directly at Peter's face. The ultrasound photo fluttered to the floor like a broken promise, landing face up so that everyone nearby could see the tiny figure curled safely in what should have been love's sanctuary. The pregnancy test fell beside it, those 2 pink lines still visible in the crystal chandelier light, bearing witness to the future that had just been destroyed. The silence was deafening. 200 guests stared at the evidence of what Peter had just lost, many of them crying openly at witnessing the destruction of what they had all believed was the perfect marriage. Julie looked around the room one last time, seeing the shock on faces that had watched her marriage die in real time. Then she lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the door with the grace of a queen in exile. "Julie!" Peter's voice cracked across the room as the full horror of what he'd done crashed over him like a tidal wave. "Julie, wait!" But she was already gone, disappeared into the December night like a dream he'd foolishly thrown away. Peter stared down at the ultrasound photo, his hands shaking as he picked it up with trembling fingers. There, in black and white, was the proof of everything he'd just destroyed. A tiny figure with a perfectly formed head, little arms and legs, their child growing safe and loved in Julie's womb until this moment. The date on the ultrasound showed she was 9 weeks pregnant. She had been carrying his baby for over 2 months, glowing with joy and anticipation while he had been poisoning their marriage with doubt and cruelty. The pregnancy test lay beside the photo, those 2 pink lines now feeling like an accusation, evidence of the future he had just thrown away with his vicious words. Their guests stared in stunned silence, many of them crying openly at witnessing the destruction of what they had all believed was the perfect marriage. He had called the mother of his unborn baby stupid in front of 200 people on the night she'd planned to share their greatest joy, on their 10th anniversary, on Christmas Eve. And now she was gone, disappeared into the cold December night, carrying his child and his heart with her. Chapter 5. The Devastating Discovery. Hell isn't a place of fire and brimstone. It's the moment you realize you've destroyed the only thing that ever mattered, and there's no way to take back the words that shattered everything. The guests were gone. The caterers had cleared away the remnants of what should have been a celebration. The penthouse stood empty and cold, filled only with the echo of Peter Osgood's footsteps as he paced like a caged animal, the ultrasound photo clutched in his trembling hands. 9 weeks. Julie had been carrying their child for 9 weeks, and instead of sharing her joy, he had called her stupid in front of everyone they knew. "Julie!" Peter's voice cracked as he called her name into the silence. "Julie, please!" But he knew she was gone. He could feel her absence like a physical wound, a hollowness that made it hard to breathe. The apartment that had been their sanctuary for 9 years now felt like a tomb. Peter ran to their bedroom, throwing open the walk-in closet doors. Half of Julie's clothes were gone. Her suitcases, her jewelry box, the poetry book she kept on her nightstand. She hadn't just left. She had disappeared completely, taking pieces of their life together as if she never intended to return. On their bed lay her wedding ring, the diamond catching the light like tears. The sight of it brought Peter to his knees, literally. He collapsed beside the bed, clutching the ultrasound photo to his chest as sobs tore from his throat. Their baby. They were having a baby, and he had driven her away. His phone rang, shattering the silence. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen, and for the first time in his life, Peter felt pure hatred for his mother. "Well," Eleanor's voice was crisp, satisfied. "How was the rest of your party?" "She's pregnant." The words came out broken, barely human. "Julie's pregnant, and Yes, I know." The casual admission hit Peter like a physical blow. "You knew?" "Of course I knew. I found the pregnancy test in your bathroom 3 days ago. Really, Peter, you should be thanking me. Better you find out now what kind of woman you married, the kind who keeps such important secrets." Peter's vision blurred with rage. "You manipulated me. You destroyed my marriage. I saved your future. That woman would have trapped you with a baby, kept you tied to a life beneath your potential. Now you're free to make the right choices." "Free?" Peter's voice rose to a roar. "I just lost the only woman I've ever loved. I lost my child. How is that freedom?" Eleanor's laugh was cold as winter wind. "You lost a literature professor who didn't belong in your world. Tomorrow, you can start building something real with Margaret Wellington." The phone shattered against the wall where Peter hurled it, pieces of glass and plastic scattering across the marble floor like fragments of his broken life. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of desperate phone calls and dead ends. Peter called Julie's sister in Chicago. She hadn't heard from Julie. Her parents in Atlanta knew nothing. Her colleagues at the university thought she was still on Christmas break. Her best friend from college claimed ignorance, though Peter heard something in her voice that suggested she was lying. Julie Fletcher Osgood had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. Peter hired private investigator Maxwell Hayes on December 27th, a gruff man with 40 years of experience finding people who didn't want to be found. "She's smart," Hayes said, after reviewing what little information Peter could provide. "Closed her bank accounts, quit her job effective immediately, sold her car to a dealer for cash. This wasn't an impulse decision. She planned her exit strategy." "Can you find her?" Hayes studied the ultrasound photo Peter had given him. "Maybe, but it'll take time, and it'll cost you. People who disappear this clean usually stay disappeared." "I don't care what it costs. Find my wife. Find my child." The private investigator's first lead came on New Year's Eve, a charge on Julie's credit card at a hospital in Chicago, dated December 28th. Peter's heart raced with hope and terror. Had something happened to the baby? Was Julie sick? By the time Peter reached Chicago, the trail had gone cold again. The hospital confirmed that a woman matching Julie's description had been treated in the emergency room for severe dehydration, but she had given a false name and paid in cash. The security cameras showed a woman in a hooded coat, her face hidden, leaving alone in a taxi. "She's pregnant and she's stressed," the attending physician told Peter. "Dehydration can be dangerous in the first trimester. She needs proper prenatal care." The words were torture. His wife, his pregnant wife, was somewhere out there alone, possibly sick because of what he had done. January dissolved into February. Peter's business empire, built over 15 years of relentless work, began to crumble from neglect. Board meetings were cancelled, deals fell through, partnerships dissolved. His employees watched in bewilderment as their driven, successful boss became a hollow-eyed ghost who spoke only about finding a woman none of them had ever heard him mention before. The private investigators' reports came weekly, each one more disappointing than the last. Julie had been spotted in Denver, but by the time they got there, she had vanished again. A pregnant black woman matching her description had rented an apartment in Portland under the name J. Fletcher, but when Peter arrived, the landlord said she had moved out days earlier, leaving no forwarding address. "It's like she knows you're coming," Hayes told Peter during one of their increasingly grim meetings. "She's staying one step ahead, always." Peter stared at the map on Hayes's desk, marked with red pins showing every dead end, every near miss. She's protecting herself. From me. The realization was devastating. The woman who had once run to him for comfort, who had shared every joy and sorrow, who had been his partner in everything, was now running from him like he was her greatest enemy. And maybe he was. 3 months after Christmas Eve, Peter sat alone in his empty penthouse, holding the ultrasound photo that had become his most treasured possession. Julie would be showing by now, their child growing bigger every day. Was she taking her vitamins? Was she eating enough? Was she scared? The questions tormented him every waking moment. Somewhere out there, Julie Fletcher was carrying his child, and he might never see either of them again. The empire he had built meant nothing without them. The money, the success, the respect, all of it was ashes in his mouth. He had gained the whole world and lost his soul, and it was entirely his own fault. Chapter 6. The first year of searching obsession is a cruel master that feeds on hope and grows stronger with every disappointment, turning love into madness and desperation, into a way of life that slowly destroys everything you once held dear. Peter Osgood stood in his office overlooking Central Park, but he saw none of the spring blossoms beginning to bloom outside his floor-to-ceiling windows. Instead, his bloodshot eyes were fixed on the wall that had become his shrine of desperation, a massive map of North America covered in red pins, each one marking a dead end, a false lead. A moment when he'd thought he'd found Julie, only to discover he was chasing shadows. 6 months. 6 months since Christmas Eve, and Julie Fletcher Osgood had vanished more completely than any person had a right to disappear in the modern world. She was 5 months pregnant now, showing, needing regular doctor visits, preparing for their child. The knowledge ate at Peter's soul like acid. "Sir?" His secretary's voice came through the intercom, tentative and worried. "The board is waiting for you in conference room A." Peter glanced at his Rolex. The quarterly review meeting had been scheduled for an hour ago. He'd completely forgotten, his mind consumed with the private investigator's latest report. "Tell them I'll be there shortly," Peter said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. But even as he spoke, his phone was buzzing with another call from Maxwell Hayes. The private investigator had expanded his operation, bringing in associates from 3 different countries. Peter was paying them nearly $50,000 a month, and it was worth every penny if it brought Julie home. "Hayes, tell me you have something." "Maybe." Hospital records in Vancouver show a Jane Fletcher admitted for prenatal care last week. Fits the physical description and the timing's right. Peter's heart hammered against his ribs. "I'll be on the next plane." "Mr. Osgood, I should warn you. We've been down this road before. It might not be her." But Peter was already grabbing his coat. The board meeting could wait. Hell, the entire company could wait. Nothing mattered except finding the woman who carried his heart and his child. The flight to Vancouver felt endless. Peter stared out the window at the clouds, remembering the last time he'd flown anywhere with Julie. It had been their 8th anniversary trip to Paris, where she'd cried at the beauty of the Louvre, and he'd proposed to her again with a vintage ring he'd found in a tiny shop on the left bank. She'd laughed and said yes, just like she had the first time, and they'd made love in their hotel room overlooking the Seine while she whispered how much she loved him. Now she was running from him like he was a monster. The hospital in Vancouver was clean and modern, but Peter's hands shook as he approached the reception desk. A kind-faced nurse listened to his story with growing sympathy. "I'm sorry, Mr. Osgood, but patient information is confidential. Even if Jane Fletcher were here, which I can neither confirm nor deny, I couldn't—" "Please," Peter's voice cracked. "She's my wife. She's carrying my child. I just need to know she's okay." The nurse's expression softened. "Sir, if you truly care about this woman's well-being, perhaps you should ask yourself why she doesn't want to be found." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Peter stood in the hospital lobby for an hour, hoping to catch a glimpse of a familiar figure, but Jane Fletcher, Whoever she was, remained a ghost. The flight home was torture. Hayes called while Peter was still in the air with devastating news. Jane Fletcher wasn't Julie. She was a local woman who happened to match the general description. Another dead end, another shattered hope. Back in Manhattan, Peter's business empire was crumbling. Stock prices had fallen 20%. The Henderson deal, worth $30 million, had collapsed when Peter failed to show up for 3 consecutive meetings. His CFO quit, followed by his head of operations. The board was meeting in emergency session, discussing whether to remove him as CEO. Peter didn't care about any of it. "You're destroying yourself," his business partner Robert Martinez told him during what was supposed to be a strategy meeting but had become an intervention. "Julie wouldn't want this." "You don't get to tell me what Julie would want," Peter snarled, his usual composure completely gone. "You don't know what she would want because she's not here. And she's not here because I destroyed the only good thing I ever had." Robert studied his old friend with concern. Peter had lost 20 pounds, rarely slept, and seemed to exist on nothing but coffee and determination. "Peter, you can't keep living like this." "I'm not living. I'm searching. There's a difference." The next lead came from Denver. A woman matching Julie's description had rented a small apartment under the name Julie F. Smith. She was visibly pregnant, kept to herself, and paid rent in cash. Peter's heart raced as he boarded another plane, Hayes's warning ringing in his ears. She moved out 3 days ago. No forwarding address. But Peter had to try. He had to see the place where Julie might have lived, might have slept, might have dreamed about their child. The apartment building was modest but clean, in a quiet neighborhood far from Denver's business district. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, was an elderly woman with kind eyes and a suspicious nature. "She was a lovely girl," Mrs. Chen said, studying Peter carefully. "Very quiet, very sad. She asked me once if I thought people could ever truly forgive each other." Peter's throat tightened. "What did you tell her?" "I said forgiveness is possible, but some wounds take time to heal. She cried when I said that." Mrs. Chen paused. "Are you the one who hurt her?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Peter couldn't speak, could only nod. "She was scared," Mrs. Chen continued, always looking over her shoulder, like she expected someone to find her. "When she left, she asked me to promise not to tell anyone about her, especially not her husband. I just want to talk to her, to apologize." "Some apologies come too late, young man. That girl was broken inside. Whatever you did to her, it cut deep." Peter left Denver with nothing but the knowledge that Julie had been there, had been scared, had specifically asked not to be found by him. His own wife was terrified of him. By autumn, Peter's fortune had dwindled from 42 million to less than 20 million. He'd liquidated assets, sold properties, fired half his staff. Every penny went toward the search, toward private investigators and surveillance equipment and rewards for information. The near misses continued like torture designed by a cruel god. A pregnant woman in Seattle who turned out to be Julie's height but wrong eye color. A literature professor in Toronto who had quit her job suddenly but was married to someone else. A woman in Austin who had given birth to a son but couldn't be found when Peter arrived at the hospital. Each false hope shattered him a little more. Winter approached, marking nearly a year since the Christmas Eve that had destroyed everything. Peter sat in his office, now half empty since he'd had to downsize, holding the ultrasound photo that had become his most precious possession. Somewhere, Julie had given birth to their child, a son or daughter with Peter's eyes and Julie's smile, who would grow up never knowing their father's name. The empire Peter had spent 15 years building was crumbling to dust, but he couldn't stop searching. He would spend every last dollar, sacrifice every achievement, destroy every dream if it meant finding the family he had thrown away with his cruel words. Because without Julie and their child, success meant nothing. Without them, Peter Osgood was nothing. Chapter 7. The second year, deeper desperation. Madness doesn't announce itself with dramatic flourishes. It creeps in quietly through sleepless nights and unanswered prayers, turning a desperate search for love into a haunted existence that no longer resembles anything human. Peter Osgood stood in the ruins of what had once been his corner office, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the ghosts of his former empire. The Manhattan skyline still glittered outside his windows, but the view belonged to someone else now. He'd been forced to sell the building 6 months ago, along with most of his remaining properties. His net worth had plummeted to less than $8 million, still wealthy by most standards, but a catastrophic fall from the $42 million he'd possessed before he destroyed his marriage. None of it mattered. Money was just paper when your heart was walking around somewhere in the world, carried in the body of a woman who would rather disappear than see your face again. Mr. Osgood. Maxwell Hayes stood in the doorway, his weathered face showing the strain of 20 months of fruitless searching. The private investigator looked older, grayer, worn down by the impossible task of finding a woman who had become a ghost. "I have something." Peter's head snapped up from the security footage he'd been studying for the 100th time, grainy mall surveillance from Phoenix showing a woman with a baby who could be Julie. His hands shook as he paused the video. "Tell me." Hayes sat down heavily, pulling out a thick folder. "Birth certificate. Alan Fletcher, born at Portland General Hospital 14 months ago. Mother listed as Julia Fletcher, father unknown." The world tilted on its axis. Peter gripped the edge of his desk as the words sank in like bullets. Alan. Their son's name was Alan, and he was 14 months old. Walking, probably saying his first words, growing up without ever knowing his father's name. "She had the baby," Peter whispered, the words scraping his throat raw. "Our son. His name is Alan. Sir, I need to prepare you for what we found. Julie left Portland 8 months ago. No forwarding address, no trace of where she went. But there's more." Hayes pulled out a photograph, hospital security footage showing a woman in a wheelchair being pushed toward the exit. Even from behind, even with her hair different, Peter knew that silhouette like his own heartbeat. "She was alone," Hayes continued quietly. "Gave birth alone, recovered alone, left alone with the baby. No visitors listed in the hospital records. The image of Julie laboring in pain, bringing their child into the world without him there to hold her hand or whisper encouragement, shattered what remained of Peter's already broken heart. She should have been surrounded by family, by love, by the husband who had promised to be there for every moment that mattered. Instead, she'd been utterly alone because of his cruelty. "The mall footage from Phoenix," Peter said suddenly, his voice sharp with desperate hope. "Show me again." Hayes pulled out his laptop, queuing up the security video. Peter leaned forward as the footage played. A woman with dark skin pushing a stroller through the food court, her face partially hidden by sunglasses and a baseball cap. The baby in the stroller appeared to be about a year old, with light brown skin and thick dark hair. "It could be her," Hayes said carefully. "The height matches. The build is right. But, sir, we've been down this road. It's her." Peter stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. "I know it's her. The way she moves, the way she holds her shoulders when she's trying not to be noticed. That's Julie. Mr. Osgood, even if it is, this footage is 3 weeks old. By the time we get to Phoenix..." But Peter was already grabbing his coat, his laptop, his phone. The obsession that had consumed 20 months of his life flared to life with renewed intensity. Alan. His son's name was Alan, and Julie was in Phoenix with their child. The flight to Phoenix felt eternal. Peter stared out the window at the desert landscape below, his mind racing with possibilities. What would he say to Julie when he found her? How did you apologize for destroying someone's faith in love itself? How did you explain that you'd spent nearly 2 years and $34 million trying to undo the worst moment of your life? The mall security office was cramped and smelled of stale coffee, but the head of security was cooperative once Peter explained the situation and showed him the birth certificate. "That's the Paradise Valley Mall food court," the man confirmed, studying the footage. "But sir, this video is from 3 weeks ago. If someone was trying to avoid being found, they'd be long gone by now." Peter's heart sank, but he had to try. He spent 2 days canvassing every hotel, every apartment complex, every rental agency in Phoenix and the surrounding areas. He showed Alan's birth certificate and the hospital photo to dozens of clerks and managers, searching for anyone who might have seen a young black woman traveling alone with a toddler. On the 3rd day, he found a brief spark of hope. A desk clerk at a modest hotel near the airport remembered checking in a woman who matched Julie's description about a month earlier. She paid cash for a week, the clerk told him, kept to herself, never left the baby alone. Sweet kid, maybe a year old. He had the biggest brown eyes. Did she say where she was going when she checked out? The clerk shook his head. Sorry, man. She just left one morning. Seemed like she was in a hurry. Another dead end. Another crushing disappointment. Peter returned to New York feeling more hollow than ever. His investigators continued their work, but the leads were getting colder, the trail more impossible to follow. Julie wasn't just hiding, she was actively staying ahead of them, moving frequently, always one step beyond their reach. She knows we're looking, Hayes told Peter during their monthly meeting in what remained of Peter's business office. She's smart, she's careful, and she has resources we didn't know about. Someone's helping her. The thought that Julie had allies in her escape, people who knew about Alan and were actively helping her avoid Peter, felt like betrayal layered on top of loss. But he couldn't blame them. If he'd heard the story from the outside, successful businessman publicly humiliates pregnant wife, drives her to disappear, he'd help her hide too. His reflection in the bathroom mirror was unrecognizable. Peter had lost 40 pounds over 20 months of obsessive searching. His hair had gone grey at the temples, his eyes were sunken with exhaustion, and his expensive suits hung loose on his diminished frame. He looked like what he was, a man being consumed by his own guilt and desperation. The phone rang at 2 in the morning, jolting Peter from a restless sleep on his office couch. Hayes's voice was urgent but cautious. I found something else. Property records show a Julie Fletcher rented a house in Boise, Idaho 9 months ago. Lease was paid for 6 months in advance, but she left after 3 months. I'll be on the first flight. Sir, she's not there anymore, but the landlord kept some things she left behind. Photo albums, baby clothes, maybe nothing. Peter knew that by now, but he couldn't stop himself from hoping. He flew to Boise, carrying the weight of 20 months of disappointment, but also carrying the desperate dream that maybe this time would be different. The rental house was small but clean, in a quiet neighborhood, perfect for raising a child. The landlord, an elderly man named Frank, met Peter at the door with a box of items Julie had abandoned. Nicest tenant I ever had, Frank said, shaking his head sadly. But she was running from something or someone. Jumped every time the phone rang, never stayed outside long with the baby. Inside the box were treasures that broke Peter's heart. Photo albums filled with pictures of Alan's first months, his first smile, his first time sitting up. Julie had documented everything, creating memories that should have been shared but were experienced alone instead. At the bottom of the box was a letter, unsealed, addressed to no one. Peter's hands trembled as he unfolded the paper and recognized Julie's handwriting. Alan took his first steps today. He walked 4 whole steps from the couch to my arms, and I cried because his father should have been here to see it. I keep thinking about what our life was supposed to be, birthday parties and bedtime stories, and teaching him to ride a bike. Instead, I'm teaching him to be invisible, to move quietly, to not trust the world around him. What kind of mother does that make me? The letter ended there, unfinished, and Peter understood that Julie's pain was as deep and consuming as his own. She wasn't just protecting herself, she was mourning the family they were supposed to be. As Peter flew back to New York with the box of memories, he realized the terrible truth. Julie wasn't just running from him. She was running from the life they'd lost, the dreams that had died on Christmas Eve, the future that could never be recovered. And somewhere in the vast expanse of America, his son Alan was growing up believing his father had never wanted him at all. Chapter 8. Julie's hidden life strength is not the absence of fear. It's loving someone so completely that you choose to protect them from the very person who gave them life, even when that choice slowly kills the heart that still beats only for him. Julie Fletcher sat on the worn carpet of their latest temporary home, a small apartment above a bakery in Salem, Oregon, watching her 22-month-old son stack colorful blocks with the focused determination he'd inherited from his father. Alan had Peter's eyes, warm brown with flecks of gold, and his stubborn chin, but thankfully he had her gentler temperament and her love for quiet moments. Every morning began the same way. Julie would wake before dawn, her hand instinctively reaching across the empty bed for a man who hadn't been there in over 2 years. The absence hit her fresh each day, a physical ache that had never dulled despite the passing months. She would lie there in the grey light, listening to Alan's soft breathing, and allow herself exactly 5 minutes to remember what it felt like to wake up loved. "Mama, look." Alan held up his tower of blocks proudly, his vocabulary expanding daily in the way of toddlers who were just discovering the power of words. "That's beautiful, baby," Julie said, her voice catching slightly on the endearment. At 22 months old, Alan was becoming his own little person, curious, affectionate, and blissfully unaware that their nomadic lifestyle was anything but normal. She had developed rituals to preserve the moments Peter was missing. Every evening after Alan fell asleep, Julie would write detailed entries in a journal she kept hidden beneath her mattress. Today's entry would record how Alan had stacked 6 blocks without them falling, how he'd said, "More please" at lunch, how he'd patted her face when she cried during a particularly sad movie. Someday, though she couldn't imagine when, she hoped Peter might read these words and know his son had been cherished. Julie's laptop chimed softly with another freelance editing assignment. Over the past 2 years, she'd built a modest but steady income, working for publishing houses under the name J.A. Fletcher, editing manuscripts and articles from whatever city they happened to be hiding in. It wasn't the academic career she'd once loved, but it paid the bills and allowed her to work from anywhere while staying invisible. The work was solitary and often tedious, a far cry from the stimulating discussions she'd once had with colleagues and students. Sometimes she missed the classroom so intensely it felt like grief, missed the excitement of introducing young minds to great literature, missed the scholarly debates, missed having a purpose beyond mere survival. The irony wasn't lost on her. She, who had once been surrounded by colleagues and students who had taught literature to hundreds of eager minds, now lived in complete isolation, except for her son. She'd traded her entire world for Alan's safety, and she'd make the same choice 1,000 times over. But God, it was lonely. Alan toddled over to her, his small hands patting her knee in the universal toddler request for attention. "Mama sad?" The question pierced her heart with its innocent perceptiveness. Alan had learned to read her moods with uncanny accuracy, responding to her tears with gentle pats and spontaneous hugs that broke her heart with their sweetness. Julie forced a smile, pulling him into her lap. "Mama's fine, sweetheart. Just tired." It was her standard answer, the lie she told herself as much as him. She wasn't tired, she was heartsick. Nearly 2.5 years had passed since Christmas Eve, and not a day went by that she didn't think about Peter. Was he still looking for them? Did he ever hold their ultrasound photo and wonder about the son he'd never met? Did he regret the words that had shattered their marriage into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces? The questions tortured her during Alan's naps, and in the dark hours after midnight when she lay awake planning their next move, because they always had to be ready to move. The private investigators were good. She'd spotted them in Portland, barely escaped Phoenix before they closed in, and she'd learned to recognize the telltale signs of someone asking the wrong questions in the right places. She'd developed an entire system for staying ahead of them. Never stay in one place more than 6 months. Always keep cash reserves hidden in multiple locations. Maintain backup identities and escape routes. Never form lasting friendships that could be traced. It was exhausting, paranoid, and utterly necessary for Alan's protection. "Daddy?" Alan asked suddenly, the word that never failed to stop Julie's heart. At 22 months old, Alan had begun noticing that other children had fathers. He'd started asking about his own with the innocent persistence that only toddlers possessed. Julie had prepared for this moment, but nothing could have made it easier. She had developed a careful script. "Daddy lives far away, baby, but he loves you very much." That part was true, wasn't it? Peter had to love Alan, even if he'd never met him. The Peter she'd been married to for 9 years would have moved mountains for his child. But the Peter who had called her stupid in front of 200 people, that Peter was a stranger whose love she could no longer trust. "See, Daddy?" Alan pressed, his dark eyes hopeful. Julie's throat closed with unshed tears. "Someday, sweetheart." Maybe someday. But she knew someday would never come. How could she explain to her innocent son that his father had destroyed her faith so completely that even now, even after all this time, she couldn't risk letting him near Alan? What if Peter's newfound cruelty extended to their child? What if the wealth and success that had changed him once changed him again? What if Alan grew up learning to see his mother through his father's eyes, as someone stupid, someone beneath their social standing, someone to be ashamed of? She couldn't take that risk, not with Alan's heart, and not with what remained of her own. The apartment was small but clean, furnished with items from thrift stores and yard sales. Julie had become an expert at creating homes that could be abandoned at a moment's notice. No real attachments, no meaningful possessions except for Alan's favorite stuffed elephant and the photo albums she'd started the day he was born. Those albums were her secret rebellion against their invisible life. Every milestone, every smile, every adorable moment was documented with the careful attention of a mother who knew these memories might be all Alan would ever have of his childhood. His first steps at 18 months in Denver, she'd cried as she photographed him wobbling between the couch and coffee table, knowing Peter should have been there to catch him. His first real word, "Mama," at 10 months in Sacramento, she'd called out in excitement before remembering there was no one to share the moment with. His first birthday celebrated alone in a small apartment in Phoenix, with a cake she'd baked herself and candles he'd blown out with delight. Peter should have been there for all of it. The thought came unbidden and unwelcome, as it always did. Julie pushed it away, focusing instead on Alan as he returned to his blocks. She'd made her choice on Christmas Eve, when she'd thrown that ultrasound photo at Peter's feet. She'd chosen dignity over degradation, solitude over humiliation, uncertainty over the crushing disappointment of staying with a man who no longer saw her as worthy of respect. But late at night, when Alan was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Julie sometimes allowed herself to remember the good times. 9 years of perfect marriage didn't disappear just because of one terrible night. She remembered Peter bringing her coffee in bed every morning, remembered the way he'd held her during thunderstorms because he knew they frightened her, remembered how he'd cried when she'd accepted his proposal because he couldn't believe she'd said yes. She would close her eyes and almost feel his arms around her, almost hear his voice whispering endearments against her hair. The phantom memories were so vivid they felt real, and she would wake with tears on her cheeks and the devastating knowledge that she had willingly walked away from the only love that had ever mattered. That Peter, her Peter, would have been a wonderful father. He would have paced the hospital halls during her labor, would have cried when Alan was born, would have changed diapers and given bottles and read bedtime stories with voices for all the characters. He would have taken 1,000,000 photographs and probably spoiled their son beyond reason, but that Peter had died somewhere between success and his mother's poison, leaving behind a stranger who'd valued business mergers over love, social standing over loyalty, appearances over the woman who'd stood by him through everything. "Mama, hungry," Alan announced, abandoning his blocks in favor of tugging on Julie's jeans. Julie checked her phone. Past noon already. Time moved strangely when you spent your days in self-imposed exile, marked only by a toddler's needs and the endless cycle of work, play, nap, repeat. She had lost track of seasons, holidays, everything except the basic rhythm of survival. In the tiny kitchen, she prepared Alan's lunch while he chattered about the pigeons he'd seen from the window and the nice lady at the bakery downstairs who always waved at him. His innocent joy in simple things broke her heart regularly. He deserved playmates and a backyard and grandparents who spoiled him, not this careful, constrained existence where they never stayed anywhere long enough to form real connections. Sometimes Julie wondered if she was damaging him irreparably, raising him in isolation, teaching him to be wary of strangers, never allowing him the stability of a permanent home. But then she would remember Peter's face that Christmas Eve, the cold stranger who had looked at her with contempt, and she knew she was doing the right thing. As Alan ate his sandwich, Julie's phone buzzed with a news alert. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the headline, "Real estate mogul Peter Osgood's empire continues decline amid personal crisis." With trembling fingers, she clicked the link, knowing she shouldn't but unable to stop herself. The article detailed Peter's business losses, his erratic behavior, the dissolution of partnerships that had once made him one of Manhattan's most successful entrepreneurs. There was a recent photo, Peter leaving a building, looking gaunt and hollow-eyed, a ghost of the confident man she'd once known. He was destroying himself, looking for them. The realization hit Julie like a physical blow. Part of her, the part that had loved him desperately for 9 years, wanted to run to him, to end his suffering, to let Alan meet the father who clearly loved them enough to sacrifice everything in his search. But the other part, the part that had been publicly humiliated and emotionally shattered, remembered the look in Peter's eyes that Christmas Eve, the doubt, the embarrassment, the cruel judgment of the woman who'd given him everything. What if that cruelty returned? What if letting Peter back into their lives meant subjecting Alan to the same dismissive treatment she'd endured? What if her son grew up learning to be ashamed of his mother? She couldn't risk it. She wouldn't. "Mama okay?" Alan asked, his small hand touching her cheek where a tear had fallen without her noticing. Julie wiped her eyes, forcing another smile. "Mama's fine, baby. Just remembering something sad." But she wasn't fine. She was trapped in a prison of her own making, loving a man she couldn't trust, raising his child while denying that child his father. Every day was a battle between her heart, which still beat only for Peter, and her mind, which knew that some wounds were too deep to heal. That evening, after Alan was asleep in his toddler bed, they'd finally been able to stay in one place long enough to transition him from his crib. Julie sat by the window looking out at the quiet street below. Somewhere out there, Peter was probably still searching, still hoping, still carrying the ultrasound photo that had become his cross to bear. The thought of him alone, broken, destroyed by his own mistakes, should have brought her satisfaction. Instead, it filled her with a pain so profound it felt like drowning. And she was here, raising their son alone, loving Peter still, but unable to trust that love wouldn't destroy them both. It was the cruelest kind of purgatory, loving someone completely while knowing you could never be with them again, raising their child while keeping that child from ever knowing his father's name. Every day was a choice between Alan's safety and her heart's deepest desire, and every day she chose Alan, no matter how much it cost her soul. But it was the choice she'd made, and it was the choice she'd live with, no matter how much it cost her heart to beat one more day without the only man she'd ever truly loved. Chapter 9. The Final Search. Hope dies slowly, like a candle burning down to nothing in a windowless room, until the moment when a single breath of possibility can either extinguish the flame forever or fan it back to blazing life. Peter Osgood sat in the cramped office that was all he could afford now, staring at the final invoice from Maxwell Hayes Investigations. 3 years. Nearly 3 years of searching, and his private investigator was closing the case. The money had run out, the leads had gone cold, and even Hayes's legendary persistence had finally been broken by Julie Fletcher's complete disappearance from the world. "I'm sorry, Mr. Osgood," Hayes said, his weathered face heavy with defeat. "I've found people who've been hiding for decades, but your wife, she's a ghost. Someone with resources and intelligence is helping her stay ahead of us, and after 3 years, the trail is completely cold." Peter's net worth had dwindled to less than $2 million, still more than most people would see in a lifetime, but a devastating fall from the empire he'd once commanded. He'd sold his penthouse, his cars, his art collection, everything except the ultrasound photo and a few photographs of Julie from happier times. What about the birth certificate? Alan Fletcher. "That's the only concrete evidence we have that your son exists, and it's 3 years old. No school enrollments, no medical records, no social media presence. It's like they both vanished into thin air after Portland. Alan would be almost 3 now. Walking, talking, probably asking endless questions the way toddlers did." Peter tried to imagine what his son looked like. Did he have Julie's laugh, Peter's stubborn streak, his grandmother's eyes? The not knowing was torture that had worn Peter down to a shadow of his former self. "There's one more thing," Hayes said reluctantly. "It might be nothing, but—" Peter's head snapped up, desperate hope flaring in his chest. "Tell me." "A colleague of mine in Boston thinks he spotted someone who might be Julie's college roommate. Rebecca Martinez. If anyone would know how to contact Julie, it would be her." Boston. Peter's last hope lived in Boston, and he had just enough money left for one final search. If this didn't work, he would have to accept that Julie and Alan were gone forever. The flight to Boston felt like traveling to his own execution. Peter pressed his face to the window, watching the city spread out below him like a map of his dwindling possibilities. Rebecca Martinez lived in Cambridge, worked as a social worker, and according to Hayes's research, she'd been Julie's maid of honor at their wedding. The small apartment building where Rebecca lived was modest, but well-maintained. Peter stood outside her door for 10 minutes, gathering the courage to knock. What if Rebecca refused to see him? What if she told him to leave Julie alone? What if this last thread of hope snapped in his hands like all the others? The woman who answered the door was older than Peter remembered, her black hair streaked with grey, but her eyes were the same fierce brown that had warned him during the wedding reception that if he ever hurt Julie, he'd answer to her. "Peter Osgood," Rebecca said, her voice cold as winter steel. "I wondered when you'd find me. Rebecca, please. I need to know where Julie is." "Do you?" Rebecca stepped back but didn't invite him in. "Do you really? Because from where I stand, you destroyed the best woman I've ever known, and now you want to finish the job." The words hit like physical blows, but Peter pressed on. "I made a terrible mistake. The worst mistake anyone could make. But I love her, Rebecca. I love Julie, and I love our son, and I just need a chance to—" "Our son?" Rebecca's eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been pity. "You know about Alan?" The confirmation that his son was real, that Alan truly existed somewhere in the world, nearly brought Peter to his knees. "I found his birth certificate." Alan Fletcher. Is he, is he healthy? Is Julie okay? For a moment, Rebecca's expression softened. He's beautiful, Peter. He has your eyes and your stubborn chin. But thankfully he has his mother's heart. And yes, they're both healthy. No thanks to you. Where are they? The steel returned to Rebecca's voice. Even if I knew, which I don't, I wouldn't tell you. Do you have any idea what you did to her, what you put her through? No, you don't know. Rebecca stepped fully into the hallway, closing her apartment door behind her. Julie called me that night, Christmas Eve, crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said the man she'd loved for 9 years had looked at her like she was nothing, like she was an embarrassment he needed to get rid of. She was pregnant and alone and terrified, and it was all because of you. Peter's vision blurred with tears he'd held back for 3 years. I was manipulated by my mother. I know that's not an excuse, but you're right. It's not an excuse. Julie was your wife. She deserved your protection, not your cruelty. Rebecca paused, studying Peter's haggard appearance. But she still loves you, you know. That's the tragedy of it all. After everything you did, she still loves you enough that it's destroying her to keep Alan away from you. The words were a knife to the heart and a lifeline at the same time. Then tell me where she is. Let me apologize. Let me meet my son. I can't, but I can tell you this much. Julie works remotely for a small publishing house in Boston, Hartwell and Associates. She edits manuscripts under the name J.A. Fletcher. Rebecca's expression was grim. If you truly love them, Peter, you'll leave them alone. Julie has built a life where she feels safe. Don't destroy that too. But Peter was already turning away, hope blazing in his chest for the first time in months. Julie was in Boston. She was close, closer than she'd been in 3 years. Hartwell and Associates occupied a converted brownstone in the Back Bay. Peter spent 2 days watching the building, learning the rhythms of the small staff, waiting for a glimpse of the woman who had haunted his dreams for 3 years. On the 3rd day, he saw her. Julie emerged from a coffee shop across the street, and Peter's heart stopped completely. She was still beautiful, thinner than he remembered, her hair shorter, but unmistakably the woman he'd married and lost. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, looking younger than her years, but with a wariness in her movements that broke his heart. And beside her, holding her hand with the complete trust that only children possessed, was Alan. Peter's son was perfect. Dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, warm brown eyes that were exactly like Peter's own, skin the beautiful shade that came from his mixed heritage. He was chattering animatedly to Julie, gesturing with his free hand, and when he laughed at something she said, Peter heard an echo of his own childhood laughter. For a moment, Peter forgot to breathe. This was his child, his and Julie's, walking through Boston like any other toddler with his mother, completely unaware that his father was 30 yards away, drinking in every detail of his face. Julie looked up suddenly, her gaze scanning the street with the hyper-awareness of someone who'd spent 3 years running. Their eyes met across the distance, and Peter saw her face go white with terror. "Alan, come on, baby," Julie said urgently, scooping their son into her arms and starting to run. "Mama, why running?" Alan's voice carried on the wind, confused but not frightened, trusting his mother's judgment completely. Peter ran after them, his heart pounding with desperation. "Julie, please, just let me talk to you." But Julie was already at the corner, climbing into a taxi that had been waiting with the engine running. She'd been prepared for this moment, had probably planned escape routes from every location they visited. The taxi pulled away from the curb just as Peter reached it. Through the rear window he caught one last glimpse of Alan, looking back at him with curious eyes. And then they were gone. Disappeared into Boston traffic like a dream he'd finally grasped, only to watch it slip away again. Peter stood on the sidewalk, gasping for breath, his hands shaking from adrenaline and heartbreak. He'd seen them. He'd actually seen his son, heard Alan's voice, witnessed the love between mother and child that should have included him. But he'd also seen the terror in Julie's eyes, the way she'd run from him like he was her greatest enemy. 3 years of searching, 3 years of hoping, and the woman he loved was still so afraid of him that she'd grabbed their child and fled the moment she saw his face. That night, in his cheap hotel room, Peter stared at the ceiling and finally understood the truth Rebecca had tried to tell him. Julie wasn't just hiding from him. She was protecting Alan from the possibility that Peter might hurt their son the way he'd hurt her. And maybe, Peter thought with crushing clarity, she was right to do it. Maybe love sometimes meant staying away from the people you loved most, if your presence in their lives would cause them more pain than joy. But as Peter closed his eyes and tried to sleep, Alan's laughing voice echoed in his memory, and he knew that giving up was impossible. His son deserved to know that his father had never stopped looking for him, never stopped loving him, never stopped regretting the moment that had torn their family apart. Even if it meant searching for the rest of his life, Peter would find them again. Chapter 10. The Reunion. Sometimes the greatest miracles begin with the smallest voices, and the deepest wounds are healed not by grand gestures or perfect words, but by a child's innocent heart that sees love where adults see only fear and failure. Christmas Eve morning dawned grey and cold in the small coastal town of Seaside Cove, Maine, where Julie Fletcher had been hiding for the past 6 months. The town was picture-perfect in its holiday dress. White lights strung between lampposts, wreaths hanging on every door, and snow falling softly on the Christmas market that had been set up in the town square for the past week. Julie stood at her apartment window, watching the early shoppers browsing the wooden stalls below, her hand unconsciously moving to the silver locket she wore around her neck. Inside was the only photo she'd kept of Peter, their wedding day, both of them laughing with pure joy, believing their love could conquer anything the world might throw at them. 3 years ago today, 3 years since the Christmas Eve that had split her life into before and after, love and loss, hope and heartbreak. "Mama, Christmas market." Alan pressed his face against the window beside her, his breath fogging the glass with excitement. At 2 years and 4 months old, he was all energy and curiosity, with Peter's intelligent eyes and his father's stubborn determination. "Please, Mama. Please." Julie's heart clenched as it did every time she saw Peter's expressions reflected in their son's face. Alan had been asking about the Christmas market all week, enchanted by the lights and music and the promise of hot chocolate and cookies. How could she deny him this simple joy, especially when they might have to leave town again soon? "All right, baby," Julie said, forcing a smile, "but we stay close together, okay? You hold Mama's hand." Alan nodded solemnly, then bounced with excitement as Julie bundled him into his winter coat and mittens. They had been so careful, so cautious, but it was Christmas Eve, and her son deserved at least one magical holiday memory. The Christmas market was bustling with families, couples, and children running between the stalls, while parents chased after them with exasperated affection. Julie kept Alan's hand firmly in hers as they wandered through the maze of vendors selling handmade ornaments, warm mittens, and holiday treats that smelled like cinnamon and hope. "Look, Mama." Alan pointed at a puppet show where a group of children sat cross-legged on hay bales, laughing at the antics of colorful marionettes. "Can I watch?" Julie hesitated, scanning the crowd with the hyper-awareness that had become second nature. No suspicious faces, no one watching them too intently, no signs of the private investigators who had haunted their lives for 3 years. Maybe, just this once, they could pretend to be a normal mother and son enjoying Christmas together. 5 minutes, Julie said, settling Alan among the other children. "Don't move from this spot, okay?" Alan nodded eagerly, already entranced by the puppet show. Julie stood just a few feet away, close enough to watch him but far enough to let him feel independent. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what this scene should have been. Peter standing beside her, his arm around her shoulders, both of them watching their son's delight with shared joy. The fantasy was so vivid she could almost feel Peter's presence, could almost hear his voice saying something funny about the puppet show that would make her laugh despite herself. The longing hit her like a physical pain, sharp and sudden, and she had to close her eyes against the tears. When she opened them again, Alan was gone. "Alan!" Julie's voice cracked with instant panic. The hay bales where her son had been sitting just seconds before were empty, the other children still watching the show, their parents chatting nearby. "Alan!" Julie pushed through the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs, terror flooding her system like ice water. The Christmas market suddenly seemed enormous, full of hiding places and strangers, and 1,000 ways a 3-year-old could disappear or get hurt. "Alan! Alan, where are you?" Meanwhile, 50 yards away near the hot chocolate stand, Peter Osgood knelt in the snow beside a small boy who had wandered away from the crowd, looking lost and overwhelmed by the bustling market. Peter had been watching the Christmas festivities from a distance, torturing himself with thoughts of Julie and Alan somewhere in the world, probably celebrating their 3rd Christmas without him. When he'd seen the little boy standing alone, crying softly, Peter's instincts had taken over. Only when he knelt down to the child's level did he see the face that had haunted his dreams for 3 years. The boy had Peter's eyes, exactly Peter's eyes, warm brown with flecks of gold, set in a face that was a perfect blend of his features and Julie's. This was Alan, his son. The child he'd been searching for desperately was standing right in front of him, tears streaming down cheeks that looked exactly like Peter's own had at that age. "Hey there," Peter said gently, his voice shaking with overwhelming emotion. "Are you lost?" Alan looked up at him with those familiar eyes, studying Peter's face with the serious attention that 2-year-olds brought to important decisions. "I can't find Mama," he said in a small voice that broke Peter's heart into 1,000,000 pieces. "What's your name, buddy?" Alan Fletcher." The boy wiped his nose with his mitten, still studying Peter intently. "Who are you?" The question hit Peter like a lightning bolt. How do you tell your 3-year-old son who you are when you've never been part of his life? How do you explain love and loss and the terrible mistakes that keep families apart? "My name is Peter," he said carefully, "and I've been looking for you for a very long time." Alan tilted his head, processing this information with the swift intuition that children possessed. "Are you my daddy?" The simple question shattered what remained of Peter's composure. Tears started flowing down his face, tears of joy, of grief, of 3 years of accumulated love and loss and desperate longing. He nodded, unable to speak, unable to do anything but memorize every detail of his son's perfect face. "Daddy!" Alan threw himself into Peter's arms with the complete trust that only children could give, hugging him with small but strong arms. "I knew you would come. Mama said maybe someday, and now it's someday." Peter held his son against his chest, breathing in the scent of his hair, feeling the rapid beat of Alan's heart against his own. This was his child, his and Julie's, warm and real and more beautiful than every dream he'd carried for 3 years. "Alan! Alan!" Julie's voice cut through the market noise, sharp with terror. Peter looked up to see Julie running toward them, her face white with panic and something that might have been fury. She stopped short when she saw them together. Peter kneeling in the snow with Alan in his arms, both of them crying. "Mama!" Alan waved from Peter's embrace, completely unaware of the emotional storm raging between his parents. "Look! My daddy came, just like you said!" Julie stood frozen, her chest heaving, her hands trembling. For 3 years she had imagined this moment, planned for it, feared it, and now that it was here, she had no idea what to do. Peter looked older, thinner, broken in ways that made her heart ache, despite everything that had happened between them. "Let him go," Julie said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears starting to fall. Peter didn't argue. He kissed Alan's forehead and gently set him on his feet, but Alan immediately reached for both their hands, standing between his parents with the satisfied expression of a child who had solved a puzzle the adults couldn't figure out. "Julie," Peter said, his voice raw with emotion, "please, just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. You made yourself very clear 3 years ago." "No, I didn't. I was an idiot, a fool, the worst kind of monster. My mother poisoned me against you, but that's no excuse. I should have protected you, defended you, loved you the way I promised I would. Instead, I destroyed everything good in my life." Alan looked between them, his small face serious. "Why is Daddy crying like you do, Mama?" The innocent question hit both parents like a physical blow. Julie stared at her son, then at Peter, seeing for the first time the depth of his suffering. He wasn't the cruel stranger who had humiliated her. He was a broken man who had lost everything that mattered. "Because Daddy made a terrible mistake," Peter said, kneeling again so he was at Alan's eye level. "I hurt Mama's feelings very badly, and now I don't know how to make it better." Alan considered this with the wisdom that children sometimes possessed. "You say sorry, then you hug, then it's better." "It's not that simple, baby," Julie whispered. "Why not?" Alan looked genuinely confused. "When I'm mean, I say sorry and you forgive me. When you're sad, I hug you and you feel better. That's how love works, out of the mouths of babes." Peter looked at Julie with eyes that held 3 years of regret and love and desperate hope. "I am so sorry, Julie. I'm sorry for every cruel word, every doubt, every day I let my mother's poison turn me into someone you couldn't recognize. I'm sorry for missing Alan's birth, his first steps, his first words. I'm sorry for making you run, for making you afraid, for turning the greatest love of my life into something that hurt you." Julie was crying openly now, years of pain and longing pouring out. "You called me stupid, Peter. In front of everyone. On the night I was going to tell you about Alan. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" "It destroyed me too," Peter said quietly. "The moment I realized what I'd done, what I'd lost, it destroyed me completely. I've spent every day since then trying to find you, trying to undo the worst mistake anyone could make. I lost my business, my fortune, everything, and I'd lose it all again if it meant having one more chance to love you the way you deserve." Alan had been listening with the concentration of a child trying to understand adult problems. Now he moved closer to Julie, patting her leg comfortingly. "Mama, you love Daddy." Julie looked down at her son through her tears. "Yes, baby. I never stopped loving Daddy." "Daddy, you love Mama?" Peter's voice was thick with emotion. "More than anything in the world. More than life itself." Alan nodded with satisfaction. "Then come home, Daddy. We have cookies." The simple invitation, delivered with such innocent faith, broke the last of Julie's defenses. She looked at Peter, really looked at him, and saw not the successful businessman who had grown too big for their love, but the man who had spent 3 years and everything he owned trying to find his family. "I was so scared," Julie whispered. "Scared you'd decide Alan wasn't good enough either. Wasn't what you wanted for your perfect life." Peter stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Alan is perfect because he's ours, because he's part of you, and there is no life, perfect or otherwise, without both of you in it." Julie took a shuddering breath, feeling the walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crumble. "I don't know how to trust again, Peter. I don't know how to stop being afraid." "We'll figure it out together," Peter said, taking a tentative step toward her. The way we used to figure everything out together. I'll spend the rest of my life earning back your trust, proving that the man who hurt you is gone, and the man who loves you is here to stay." Alan, apparently tired of the emotional conversation, tugged on both their hands. "Come on, I want to show Daddy my room, and my elephant, and my books." Julie laughed through her tears, the sound like music to Peter's ears. "You want to see our life?" "I want to be part of your life," Peter corrected, "if you'll let me." Julie looked at her husband, because despite everything, she'd never stopped thinking of him that way, and at their son standing between them, holding both their hands with complete faith that love could fix anything. "Come home, Peter," she whispered, the words carrying 3 years of pain and love and hope. Peter didn't need to be asked twice. He swept both Julie and Alan into his arms, holding them against his heart while snow fell around them like a blessing. After 3 years of searching, 3 years of heartbreak, 3 years of punishment for the worst moment of his life, Peter Osgood was finally home. Epilogue. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear in the small apartment above the bakery. Peter woke to the sound of Alan's excited whispers and Julie's soft laughter from the living room, where they were arranging presents under a small tree that hadn't been there the night before. "Daddy! Wake up! Santa came!" Alan bounded onto the bed, launching himself into Peter's arms with the fearless joy of a child who had never doubted he was loved. Julie appeared in the doorway, her smile tentative but real, holding 2 cups of coffee, his prepared exactly the way he liked it, a ritual she'd never forgotten, despite 3 years apart. "Merry Christmas," she said softly. Peter sat up, pulling Alan onto his lap and reaching for Julie's hand. "The merriest Christmas of my life." And as they sat together opening presents, Alan chattering excitedly about everything Santa had brought, Julie and Peter caught each other's eyes over their son's head and smiled. They had a long way to go, trust to rebuild, wounds to heal. But they were together, and they were home, and love, real love, was always worth fighting for. Outside, the snow continued to fall on Seaside Cove, covering everything in white, like a fresh start, like a second chance, like the promise that sometimes, if you're very lucky and very sorry and very willing to change, love really can conquer all.